Welcome to my Commodore 64 Games Memories. This is where I look at old games and some of the technical details behind them. Let's get into it. Today we have Terra Cresta, published in 1986 by Imagine, coded by David Collier, graphics by Stefan Wahid, and he did the title screen too, and the musician is of course Martin Galway. I'm going to have a look at the tape version first today. So the tape version is interesting because the tape header actually doesn't contain any extra information, just the file name and the load address and the start address and everything else. But then once the game actually starts loading, the game loads over the vectors and also sends data into the tape header anyway, and also at the top of the screen here. This is the turbo loader, so I don't know why they didn't just put the data in the tape header to begin with. It's certainly known technology at this point. Anyway, so we get into this loader, and it's loading a load of data up into the top of memory. And I think we can guess from this loader, especially because it's Imagine, that we're going to get some music, of course. And then this rather lovely loading screen. We can see that there's a whole bunch of code right up at the beginning of memory, which is actually the loader itself. It's quite a complicated little state machine, this. It uses a lot of stack pushing and popping to get the data into the right place in memory. But I'm not going to have too long a look at this, because what I really want to do in this video is that I really want to get into looking at the technical ability of the game, especially with its sprite multiplexing. Now this game, when it came out way back when, was actually really impressive to me because of the sprite multiplexer and how well it handled first the large player ship, but also secondly how many enemies it actually had on screen at the same time. And of course, actually the game had in-game music and sound effects which interrupted the music on a particular channel, I think it was. So here I can actually see a couple of stores into D020 and D021, which are repeated stores into the screen and border colors, but they're always storing black, which was a little bit intriguing. It's always kind of like making me assume that there's something missing in this loader, or maybe they just didn't want to have some extra state and clear the border color once to black. They wanted to have it cleared to black all the time, perhaps. Maybe it was part of the screen initialization for the bitmap, and it just got left hanging around in there. Anyway, so this loading music should be familiar to anyone who's played any amount of Commodore 64 games, especially loading games from tape. This is commonly known as the Ocean or Imagine loader. We can see the loading bitmap. There we can see that the game data skips as much as possible over the bitmap and the music until the last possible minute. We're greeted by this functional title screen. So into the C64 debug GUI. Moving the crosshairs up and down the screen, we can see that the screen seems to turn off and turn on again at the bottom and the top of the screen, which kind of indicates to me that there is at least some of the border blanking routines still running, which is rather strange to see them running on the title screen. We can see it's doing a compare with D012 here, which is the raster position on the screen before kicking off a whole bunch of screen initialization there, and then running into the next interrupt. Because the interrupts are actually using FFFA and FFFB, so on and so forth, then we can see actually that the kernel has been switched off at this point. So games back from this kind of era, I seem to notice that most of them have the kernel switched on, which means that they're using the 03140315 IRQ vector. It's a little bit unusual to see the kernel switched off, so using the vectors up at the end of RAM. So anyway, let's get into the game, and we can immediately see that we have a whole bunch of sprites up in the top border, along with the game sprites. Now these, what look like initially 4 sprites up in the top border, are actually 6 sprites. So we have 4 sprites being used for the score panel in the middle, and it's 2 high resolution sprites next to each other, with the same high resolution score indicator being used but with a slight offset to the bottom, down to the left, to actually show a high resolution score with what looks like multicolour colour depth to it, which was quite a nice little effect. Now the eagle-eyed of you will notice that I'm not dying when I get hit by bullets, and that's because I've switched on invulnerability, because this game is difficult enough. So this game has a really unusual, for the time, mechanic where you actually upgrade the spaceship and you actually pick up larger and larger things. So actually the player's ship goes from 1 sprite to using 3 sprites. And of course when you fire in this way and you expand your ship, you press spacebar to do this, it separates and it goes into firing larger bullets. So this mechanic actually puts even more stress on the multiplexer. So I'm trying to pick up all of these other bits now. Here we go, let's see if I can get that. Good, got that one too. So now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 sprites all bolted together, which makes an even bigger ship, with even more multiplexer issues. Now of course when things get really busy, the multiplexer does have some challenges. It's kind of to be expected really. I'm going to keep on playing until I upgrade this player ship fully, and then I'm going to move into the Vic debug view so we can actually see exactly how many sprites are on screen in certain parts of the game. Bear with me for a moment. Another ship upgrade should be coming along, there we go, very shortly. Hopefully I can pick this one up, there we go. So now we have an extra bolt-on thing to the front of our spaceship. And then in a rather friendly manner we should get the last upgrade coming along quite soon now. Here we are, upgrade number 5. There we go, and you turn into this kind of like flaming phoenix for a little while. This game in the arcade of course was quite famous for this kind of upgrade. Now you can see here how many sprites are on the screen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12. You can of course separate the player's ship like this. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, plus all of the bullets, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, plus the sprites for the score panel. The sprite multiplexer in this, for the time when it was released, is actually really very accomplished. And then, to really make everyone quite surprised, including me when I was playing this originally, we have this lovely 3x3 grid of the boss ship along with its bullets and the player. Of course, now if you move the player ship up to where it was, then you could see that there was quite a lot of sprite corruption going on, and that's because the Commodore 64 has a limit of 8 sprites in a horizontal band. And then of course it takes time to update the sprite registers to display the next bunch of sprites, so you get that kind of blanking out issue where the sprite registers are updating as the sprites are being rendered. Arcade games also had this as well. many arcade games that had some kind of like scanline sprite renderer would have sprite dropout. It's just that the arcade games had a much higher limit before their sprites would drop out. There's a finite amount of data usually that you can fetch during each scanline due to memory speeds, and that's what causes the sprite dropout. So moving up and down here, you can see precisely exactly how many sprites are being used. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And as I move up, you can see that this multiplexer uses the just-in-time method to updating its sprite registers. So if I move down to where new sprites are needed, then the new sprite registers are only updated just in time, so like maybe 5 or 6 scan lines above where they're actually needed. The score panel registers here are all, obviously, as you would normally expect, consistent, but then when moving down, new sprite registers are updated and then the sprites just come onto the screen. Now this way of updating the sprite multiplexer means that you have to calculate the next position just before you need the sprite to be visible on the screen, and then you have to time your update interrupt there. Now the interesting thing here is that we seem to have 2B seems to be an index register, and then 6, 7 here seems to be the Y position, which is storing into a temporary 0-page register here, and it then uses that Y position to calculate the next raster interrupt position if the current raster interrupt position is too far above where it needs the sprite. If it's at the right position, then it goes down and then it starts loading what looks like the X position from A3, and that's at 4CB5. Now A3, because we've got a shift after it, we can see that it's using the same kind of trick. It's using the divided by 2 X position trick, as some of the other games that we looked at recently, like Turrican 2 and Turrican, for example, where to save on memory space, it doesn't, and to save on CPU time, it doesn't update the MSB until the sprites actually get to the multiplexer. This does mean, of course, that sprites have horizontal reduction in horizontal accuracy in terms of their movement on screen, but it means that all of your game update logic doesn't have to take into account 9-bit arithmetic, it only has to do 8-bit arithmetic. Here it's doing the carry, clear and carry set updates for D010, which is MSB. Actually, this code is not entirely optimal. There are ways in optimizing that to make it a little bit shorter, but hey ho. It's then reloading the sprite Y position from that temporary 0-page register at OC and then storing it at D001. Again, this is using index, X updates into the sprite registers. Now this makes the code small, but it does make it a little bit slower. To be honest, I would have a dedicated unrolled sprite register updates because it's only 8 of them that you need for the different sprite registers, because there are a maximum of 8 horizontal sprites on the Commodore 64. And this would have made the multiplexer a little bit more optimal, or it would have saved, like a fraction of a raster line. You would have had less sprite flickers, and you would have had slightly more time during the screen to actually do the scrolling. But what really makes a multiplexer is actually the sort routine, not just the IRQ routines, but the sort routine that goes along with the multiplexer, because that's what takes a lot of the time. The better your sort routine, the faster your sort routine, generally speaking, the more sprites you can update on the screen. We can see here that there's quite a nice grouping of sprites which are on the screen. So to find the multiplexer, we need to find where in the code these tables of X position, Y position, and also those index tables are updated, especially the index table, which is at 2B until 48 in hex. So we'll have a look through the code later on to see if we can find what updates those. Just moving up and down here on the screen raster position just to check, and I can see that the score panel sprites, the sprite registers for those, are actually updated way up at the beginning of the screen. So around about raster line 0405. The score panel sprites don't seem to be updated as part of the normal multiplexer. The normal multiplexer comes in and starts doing its sprite register updates just after the score panel sprites finish. Just in this split where there is a black area which is meant to be the border, where the screen border, which is actually enabled, is actually switched on. So the screen blanking is done by switching the screen into an illegal screen mode, which makes it look like there's a border, but there isn't, because obviously the sprites are in the border, so the vertical border is switched off. We can see the same IRQ code here is updating for the next sprites that are going to be visible. And it's the same code that we were looking at before, it's just using different X and Y indexes to index the correct sprite from its source table into the destination sprite into the VIC video chip registers. Again, we can see that LDA A3, X and the ASL, which is the X position multiplier. I'm just adding some debug notes here where we have the colors and the frames, memory addresses identified, and calculating maximum of 1E sprites, which is 30 sprites in decimal. And that's by basically subtracting the difference between two different tables in memory and then assuming that those tables are squished up against each other and that there's no spare space between them. So I think 30 sprites is quite a sensible upper limit for a multiplexer of this era. So I just wanted to draw attention to one thing here, and that's that when the player dies and we get to the high score table display, the high scores are actually using sprites, and they seem to be using sprites which use the general purpose multiplexer. And we can see here that the score panel sprites are available, and also the game background is scrolling along as well. So we've got these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 horizontal and 5 rows, so that's 5 times 5, which is 25 sprites, plus these 3 here, 25, 26, 27, 28 sprites, all using the general purpose in-game multiplexer to display this rather lovely grid of high scores just scrolling up the screen. Effortlessly, I need my teeth put in, I guess, effortlessly scrolling up the screen, which is fantastic. We can see here, just double checking, that it's using the same general purpose multiplexer was being used during the game. Isn't that fantastic? I think that's a really good use of such a nice general purpose multiplexer, just to really emphasize the fact that the game engine was capable of doing such a thing. So let's go into ICU64 debugger now so we can actually see into the graphics, and we can see the layout of the sprite sheet here. We can see that the score panel sprites in the bottom right hand corner of the sprite sheet in memory here are updating as you would normally expect, as score, lives, and the ship status, how large the ship is, what the ship upgrade status is. We can see that the screens are using a double buffered character screen arrangement in the two top screens there in the graphics map to the character sets. Again, this is not too much of a surprise. To be honest, I would have been surprised if it wasn't using a double buffered screen arrangement, to be honest. Now the thing about this game is that as the level scrolls along, we get extra characters being copied in, so the game actually makes use of the right characters. And I'll try and capture a video of that section of the level. Bear with me for a second. But we also get dynamic sprites being copied in as well for some of the bosses. So here we go. Watch out for the character sets being updated first. As you would normally expect, right, we're flying over the sea area. There's going to be some transition here. And there we go, we just saw that this character's got copied into, and of course we get more graphical variation in terms of different architecture appearing on the level. I'm just zooming ahead a little bit. There we go, just picking up the upgrade yet again. We're going to get more dynamic characters being copied in. There we are, those are where the characters are copied into. And this is for the next part of the level. So at this point in the game, just before the boss comes in, or one of the level bosses comes in, we get a whole bunch of extra sprites being copied into where the boss sprite needs to update. There we go. So scrolling around through the graphics, sprite graphics map in memory, we can see where those sprites are copied from. The sea area is coming into view, so we will get some more dynamic characters come in. There we go. So it seems to be on boundaries of different architectural, different background graphics as you would normally expect. Right. Now we're getting a new boss, mid-level boss coming in. So we're going to get the sprites now copied in again. There we are. New dynamic sprites coming in, and then the boss comes along. The multiplexer does really handle this mess of sprites really quite well, to be honest. I think the last boss is coming up now, and the sprites get copied in, and then we get all of these hands flying around. I think the core boss is still using the 3x3 arrangement of sprites, but we have just more hands flying around or something like that. We also have quite a lot of bullets and explosions going on, so no wonder we're getting these horizontal gaps here where the sprites registers get updated as the sprites are being displayed still. So let's have a look into the code to see if we can see whether or not the multiplexer uses all of the hardware sprites in the Commodore 64 and what the sort method is used in this multiplexer. So first of all, on the title screen, let's see if we can see any stores to the sprite registers, and straight away we can see that we've got a store to the sprite register up here, but we don't seem to have any sprites visible on the title screen, which is a little bit puzzling, isn't it? Why would the game be updating the sprite registers if there are no sprites visible? Let's just double check that. Yeah, in C64 debug GUI we don't see any sprites at all in the title screen. So maybe the sprites are switched off, but there is just some extra code flying around somewhere in the title screen, which is still doing the sprite update. There are no red bounding boxes indicating that there are no sprites at all visible here. We can see here it's actually part of the, what looks like part of the general purpose multiplexer, is it? Yes, it is, because we've got the load with A3, X there, and then the ASLA, which multiplies by 2 and then stores it in 0B at 4CP5 there. So, yeah, it's the general purpose multiplexer doing sprite updates where there aren't any sprites on the title screen. So the Y position table for the sprites here seems to indicate that all of the Y positions are at D0. So I'm guessing that that's just nice cleared memory. If we have a look at the sort table seems to be completely in order from 0 to 1D there, so indicating that there are no sprites out of order. Maybe it hasn't even called the sort routine at this point. So yes, I'm going to set up a breakpoint for 2B248 in hex. Now I'm using the newer version of Vice now, so these 0-page breakpoints do work. This is why I'm not using ICU64, because ICU64 is using an older version of Vice, where the 0-page breakpoints are not that reliable. So let's put up a ranged breakpoint here on stores, or watch point for stores to those two, for that memory range there. Now this is intriguing. There's an RTI, there seems to be a spare byte between the RTI and the start address of the next function. Let's put a breakpoint on 4936, and there we go, there, whoops. Let's just not scroll up into the byte, which is causing issues. There we go. So this is doing a load X with 0E, and then it seems to be doing a partially unrolled loop copy, but it's still doing a copy with an indirected X register. It's doing a store to 2B, but it's also doing a store, so it's doing a load from 49 store to 2B. But it's also doing a load from 5A and a store to 3A. So 0E, I think, is 1E divided by 2. Right, so it's just partially unrolling the loop, just to make it a little bit quicker. Ah, yes, of course it's F, but you're only doing from 0 to E, which is F number of elements. My mental hex arithmetic was off by 1, but it still holds true. We've got a partially unrolled loop to avoid too many iterations through. And this just basically speeds up the loop by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times 15 cycles, something like that, which is, you know, maybe 2.5 raster lines that it's quicker by. So this helps. You want to do, and what it looks like is that it's doing a copy from off-screen registers to the on-screen data tables, and that's probably because there's more calculation going on in the off-screen due to animation and sprite sorting, and it wants to update that as quickly as possible before the multiplexer starts kicking in and rendering from the on-screen tables. Okay, so this is it's basically doing a double buffer, but the double buffer is not changing in memory from where the sprite multiplexer is pulling the data is being copied into that on-screen buffer, which for a small amount of data is perfectly valid. It saves having 2 different copies of the multiplexer code in memory. It saves having to swap all of your logic between 2 different tables. You're just calculating into one table and then doing an optimized semi-unrolled loop copy of all of that data. So I'm just adding some notes here to remind me now what are on-screen and off-screen values, because I need to look now for what updates the off-screen index values and the off-screen sprite position values. So let's have a look for those data ranges there. So let's put a ranged watch point now for storing into the off-screen index table, and let's let the game continue. There's no stores into the off-screen index table going on during the title screen, but when the game starts, we do. This is intriguing. There, it seems to be doing a copy from the previous element into the next element, and it seems to be doing that copy backwards, and this is doing it in a loop. This is what looks like it's opening a space in the off-screen sprite index sort table. Yeah. And we seem to have the entry point for this sort at 4B12. It looks like the entry point because the RTI instruction is just before it. RTI is returned from interrupt. I'm just going to add some labels here to make it a little bit more readable for you and for me. It always helps to make the code a little bit more understandable. Let's add a label for the sort index table, off-screen table rather, -1 as well, just to make it even more readable. It's loading the sort table index value here, and then it's loading 8.5, which is the Y position, right? The off-screen Y position. So it's loading two index values. It's loading and comparing the previous and the current sprite Y position. So it's doing a sprite Y position lookup using the previous two sort index table values. And it's doing a compare there at 4b1f, and then it's doing a branch on carry set to 4b53, which increments x and then goes to cpx at 1e here. So that basically misses out the sort, but it seems to be doing the sort, which is at 4b24. This little routine here seems to be opening, or this routine notices that two Y values are the wrong way around, and for a sort routine to work, it needs to sort that order out. So it then searches through the table for the correct position to insert this Y value index table pointer to. It then opens up this point in the table, and then it puts back in the misaligned or out of order table index value at that point. So this is an insertion sort, isn't it? Let's add a note to that effect there. An insertion sort where basically the index, or the basically what is effectively the Y sprite Y position, right, but it's indexed Y position, is inserted into the correct point into the table, and then it searches up through the rest of the table, and it keeps on doing that for each position in the table. It doesn't need to continuously go back to the very beginning of the table because it knows that it's already sorted those, because it's doing an insertion into the correct point in the table. So it only needs to search one way going up through the table. This is different to a radix sort, which was used in, say for example, Armalite, and you can see my previous video on the radix sort. This is also different to a bubble sort or a fast sort, where the sort table, where the table of sorted values needs to be rescanned, or at least some of the values need to be rescanned. This one just does a scan linearly up through the table, looking for positions to insert into. The insertion is slower, but you do fewer scans through the table. So there are pros and cons for all of these kind of approaches to multiplexers, either a radix sort, bubble sort, fast sort. Now, this multiplexer, of course, seems to be reusing the previous sort index result. So it's not doing a full sort on all of the Y positions for every frame. It's not restoring the Y positions that are unsorted and then resorting them again, because that would be a waste of time. It's actually using the previous sort result from the previous frame and then building upon that. So only sprites which change in Y position with respect to each other will then get considered for resorting. Otherwise, it's going to be skipping a lot of this stuff, because the things will, the sprite Y values, Y positions will still be in order from the previous frame. That's why the index table seems to be maintained. It seems that 19 here in 0 page, $19 in 0 page, it seems to be a flag. And this flag is zeroed at the beginning of the routine and then incremented there at 4b3b whenever it does an insertion. I wonder if that $19 flag is actually used anyway. So just emphasizing the $19 equals a sort flag here. and the sort flag, we can check for that being updated. It's right there. So let's put a breakpoint just after it increments that sort flag, so we know that the sort routine has done a sort. And we can see that the game only triggers that to be to actually occur when new sprites start coming onto the game's screen, or when sprites fire a bullet, for example, and then the next sprite is out of order. So it looks like definitely there's a sort flag being updated there, of course, when sprites are out of order. So I thought I'll bring up this page here on insertion sort from Wikipedia. There's a nice little visual description about how this sort works. So this 2 value wants to be inserted into its correct place. So it's basically creating a space inside the table. Next is the value 4. It searches through the table for the right position, opening up spaces, and then the 4 value is plugged into the table there. This is basically what an insertion sort does. What this insertion sort is doing is that kind of detection of out of order elements, scanning for the right position, and then inserting space into the table to insert the element back into. So we can see at 471E it does the JSR to 4B12, which is the sort routine. If we want to see how long or how much CPU time this sort routine is actually taking, we can use the increment and decrement border trick to highlight on the border color how much time this routine is actually going to be taking. So let's have a look for some spare memory where we don't care about, we don't want to put code into where there's code already, but we can put code into where there's graphics, where we know that those graphics are not going to really matter to the game, right? So we're going to put some code, extra code to increment and decrement the border into this area here, which is 5D11 approximately. So maybe not at 5T00, that still looks like maybe code. We'll keep on looking through until we get to some sprite data. Ah, there we go, that looks like sprites. So let's pick a nice round memory address to put the extra code into, and I think we can put it at 5F00, right? That's the MS sprite data there. MS is memory show sprite or something like that, mem sprite, right? So we'll put in increment D020, which is the border color, JSR to what was the correct address? 4B12, wasn't it? And then a decrement, and then an RTS. And then what we'll do is that we will assemble over the JSR to be pointing at our new routine, which increments and decrements the border color while calling its sort routine. So let's do that. And then if we run the game, we'll see a white bar probably down near the bottom of the screen where the sprite multiplexor is calling its sort routine. And there we go. We've got a nice, actually very narrow bar. When new sprites come on, or when sprites change their relative Y position to each other, so the ordering should change, we can see that there is an extra flick of increased raster time where the new sprite is being inserted into the sort table. It's late. But that increase in raster time only occurs occasionally. The rest of the time, the raster time, actually the processor time for that sort routine is actually pretty good. Now, of course, it does have variable execution time, and it does seem to spike a bit, but those spikes are quite controllable by reducing the number of sprites that simultaneously occur on the game area. So don't spawn too many sprites, don't spawn too many bullets on the same frame to cause, don't move too much all in one go, out of order relative to each other, and then you'll be fine. So that's right, isn't it? So we can see here that these bullets that spin around and around and around do tax the sort routine more. Now, this is what you get with using an insertion sort routine. And there are pros and cons to these different kind of like sort methodologies, whether or not you use bulk sort, quick sort. It depends on the number of elements in your list, depending on how the order or rough order or partial order of the data that you're putting into it. So it's swings and roundabouts, pros and cons, and whether or not in this game, for these kind of like attack waves and stuff like that, and sprite patterns, whether or not the insertion sort works out, or whether or not a quicker sort would have been more stable in terms of used CPU time. So from when this game was actually released, it's a pretty good effort, right? When this game was released, the multiplexor was extremely good quality for the time. I think the coder did an excellent job on this. So let's just double check. The other question that we have now is that whether or not the sprite multiplexor uses all of the sprites of the Commodore 64, or whether or not, like we saw in Turrican, one sprite was reserved going all the way down the screen, or 2 sprites, or 3 sprites, or however many it is. Let's see if we have reserved sprites or not. The way that we can do that is that we can check the registers as they're being stored. If we check the X register here is 0E. Actually, I think what we'll do is that we'll check the Y index here. Basically, it's doing a multiply by 2 update check. So let's look at the values for the Y register here, which does a multiply by 2 lookup into the X register. So Y is 7, then 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. So that indicates that all of the sprites from 0 to 7, all of the hardware sprites from 0 to 7, are being updated by the general purpose multiplexor at some point. So I think we can safely say that there aren't any reserved sprites. This means, of course, that the player ship sprites will be just as likely to flicker as the other sprites in the game. But I think for this kind of game, that's okay. Not a problem. So I think we'll leave this video here. I didn't want to make it too long. I just wanted to really answer the questions on the kind of multiplexor that the game was using, and what its sprite allocation strategy was, and whether or not it was using dynamic characters or sprites, and it was or is, and just have a quick look at the tape loader, which I did so. So if you like these kind of deep technical dives into retro Commodore 64 games, then please do consider liking or subscribing to this channel. And thank you very much to Modern Vintage Gamer for plugging my channel on one of his recent videos. It brought a lot of subscribers, and I'm welcoming all of the new subscribers that have been added to this channel as a result of that. I did see quite a significant bump. So if you like this kind of stuff, then please do stay subscribed, or encourage your friends to subscribe. And I hope to see you around next time. Have a great day, or evening, or night, wherever you are.